All right, number 1. So this is one of the most missed questions from the quiz from Module 14. ABC and CBD are complementary. What's it mean to be complementary? The two angles added together equal 90. So we've given our two angles, which means we can go x minus 8 plus 3x plus 2 equals 90. Then from there we can combine like terms. So x plus 3x is 4x. Negative 8 plus 2 is negative 6 equals 90. Then I want to add 6. And we get 4x equals 96. Divide by 4. And x equals... Hey, so we get 24. Now from here we need to remember to substitute back in. So for ABC we substitute 24 in for x, subtract 8. So ABC is 16. And if we substitute 24 back in for CBD, 3 times 24 is 72 plus 2 is 74. And there are complementary angles. All right, number 2. It says measure of angle 2 equals 100. So I can put 100 here. Find the measures of the rest of the angles in the diagram. Now 1 and 2, what type of relationship do 1 and 2 have? They're a linear pair. We know linear pairs are supplementary. They add to 180. So if this is 100, angle 1 has to be 80. And then 2 and 3 are vertical angles, and vertical angles are
100.
Congruent, which means angle 3 is 100.
And 4 is 80.
4 is 80. 4 and 7 are alternate interior angles, so that is 80. 2 and 8, you can do corresponding. You can do 3 and 8, which is alternate interior, so that one's 100. And then 6 becomes 100, and 5 is 80. And you can do all those by vertical angles, corresponding angles, all of that stuff there. All right, number 3 through 10, we're going to look at our diagram here. So a single pair of vertical angles, there's a bunch of them. I'm going to say angle 1 and angle 4. Linear pair, two angles that are next to each other. Again, there's quite a few of them. I'm going to say angle 7 and angle 8. Remember, in a linear pair, they have to be next to each other. Same side interior. So same side interior means it's going to be in between our lines and on the same side of that line. So in that case, we can go angle 3 and angle 7. Same side exterior means now we're going to be on the outside of those two lines. So let's go angle 2 and angle 5. Alternate interior. Alternate is opposite. Interior, we're inside. So angle 4 and angle 7. Corresponding angles means they're in the same location. So if I look at, say, angle 1, out of that group of 4, it's in the top left. So out of this group of 4, my top left one would be angle 7. So we'd go angle 1 and angle 7. Oh, sorry, I missed one. That's for number 9. Alternate exterior now means we're going to be on the outside, but we're going to be on opposite sides. So angle 2 and angle 6. And then name an angle that is supplementary to 8. So there's a bunch of them that could be supplementary to 8. 5 could be because it's a linear pair. 7 could be because it's a linear pair. 4 could be because it is same side interior, so any of those would work. So I'm going to go angle 8 and angle 5. All right, so 11 and 12. So this should say that's marked 113. What is the angle relationship between these two angles here? Okay, so they are on the same side of this line, but they're not on the interior. They're in that same location like I talked about before. But look at this, it's in the top left. This one here, it's in the top left, so we'd say that's corresponding. And in order for two lines to be parallel, corresponding angles are what? These are corresponding angles. They're supposed to be congruent. Are they congruent? Yeah, they have the same angle measure. So we would state, here's the minimum you'd have to write to get full credit. You would state yes. Okay, they are parallel. And your reason is you would state that corresponding angles are congruent. You have to have all three of those. Yes or no, the angle relationship, and what the angle relationship has to be. Okay, so we said yes, they're corresponding angles and they are congruent. That makes them parallel. Hey, for 12, use angles marked 70 and 100. What is the angle relationship of these two angles?
Same side interior.
They're same side interior. In order for two lines to be parallel, same side interior have to be what? They have to be supplementary. They have to be 180. So is 100 plus 70 equal to 180? No. So this one we would write no. And we go because same side interior angles are not supplementary. Okay, again, three things. Yes or no, we put no on this one. What is angle relationship? Same side interior. And then what is or is not. So in this case, they are not supplementary, so therefore those lines are not parallel. All right, our proof, number 13. Now, in our proof, there's one thing left off. We should have as a given that M is parallel to N. There's a lot of stuff we're going to do we can only do knowing that those two lines are parallel. So 1 is congruent to 4. What's our reason? It's given. Now, why is 4 congruent to 7? Good. 4 is congruent to 7 because of alternate interior angles. Now, 1 is congruent to 7. What's our how do we know 1 is congruent to 7? Okay, good. We have corresponding angles there.
Should the substitute was not letting me buy a soda from you yesterday.
Hey, now why are 7 and 6 supplementary? They form a linear pair. And then, how do we get from step 4 to step 5? And when we replace angle 7 with angle 1, mathematically, that is sub. Substitution property of equality. All right, number 4. Hey, again, we would need to state, this is L, that's M, that's N. There should be a statement that M is parallel to N. Now 3 and 8 are congruent because that is given. 3 is congruent to 2 because of vertical angles. 2 is congruent to 8. Okay, we can do corresponding. We can also do transitive property. Because we said 3 is to 8, so 3 is to 2, so then 2 has to be to 8 as well. And then 8 is congruent to 6 because of vertical angles. And then 2 is to 6. Again, we said 2 is to 8 as 8 is to 6. So then 2 is to 6 because of transitive property. Now in step 3, you could also use corresponding. As well for that one. All right, 15 and 16 using the same diagram here. That needs to be changed. So 129 and y form what type of angle relationship? It's a linear pair. Linear pairs add up to 180. So then 180 minus 129 gives us 51. And then for x, what's the angle relationship between 129 and x? They're vertical angles, and vertical angles are what? Congruent. So x is also 129. Now 17. States in the figure to the right, line L is perpendicular bisector. What's it mean to be perpendicular? Perpendicular means it creates 90-degree angle when they intersect. Bisector means it cuts that segment in half. So if we know that AB is 20, well, this is a bisector. These have to be congruent, so DB is 10. We would also know that these segments here are congruent as well. They don't ask us really about that one, but they do tell us that CB is 15. Then they want us to find CD there. So if we know 2 sides in a right triangle, how do we find the third side? Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So we can go a squared, I'll call this side a, plus b squared, which is 10, equals c squared, which is 15. Remember, the only one that matters that you label correctly is your c. Your c is your hypotenuse, always your longest side. So as we simplify, we get a squared plus 100 equals 225. Subtract 100. And a squared equals 125. Take square root, and a equals square root of 125. And it's 11 point something.
Oh wait, I forgot how to square root on it.
Hey, so it's 11.18, so we'll round it to 11.2.
Say if I forgot.
Hey, so we're going to use this diagram for a bunch of problems here in a row. In a parallelogram, opposite sides are parallel and Congruent. In a parallelogram, consecutive angles are up. Not there. You go.
I have a big head.
Yeah, supplementary. So that means they add to 180. In a parallelogram, diagonals blank each other. They bisect. Which means they split each other in half. Properties. So 21 says AD is 20. So then BC has to be what? 20 as well, because opposite sides are congruent. If AB is 13, what is DC then?
13.
13. If DB is 22, what then is DE? It's 11.
Bro, I did that.
Right? Diagonals bisect each other, so if the whole length is 22, half of that would be 11. All right, now for 24, AE is 18. What then does AC have to be?
36.
It has to be 36. We know it bisects, so if this section is 18, this one has to be 18 as well. Add those together, get the full length. So that is 36. $25. If ADC is 115, what is ABC? 115, because opposite angles are congruent. If DAB is 75, then ADC has to be what? Okay, because they're not opposite angles, they are what? They're angles right next to each other. We call those consecutive angles. Consecutive angles in a parallelogram are consecutive angles are supplementary, which means 75 plus x has to equal 180. Subtract that 75, and we get 105. Okay, now on 27, we're told that measure of angle 1 is 30. So what's the measure of angle 4? It is 30 as well. We know this is a parallelogram. There's my parallel sides. There's my transversal. Those are now alternate interior angles, which are congruent. So that's why that one is 30. So AED is 72. What is DEC? Not 72. If we're talking about BC, then that would be 72, because those would be vertical angles. It's 108. Why is it 108? We subtract 180 by 72 because those two angles formed a linear pair, which are supplementary, which means they add to 108. All right, 29. If ADC is 130 and measure of angle 1 is 35, what is the measure of angle 2? Well, what do we know about that angle and that angle? What do they have to be? Good. Consecutive angles are supplementary. Supplementary means they add to 180. So then we could write 130 plus 35 plus our unknown, which is x, has to equal 180. So you get 165 plus x equals 180. Subtract the 165, and x equals 15. And last one. So if AC, which is the whole length, is 30, and AE is 3x plus 3, we want to solve for x. What is the measure of AE? Yeah, AC is 30. Diagonals are bisected, which means AE is half. So that means AE is 15, which means we can write 3x plus 3 equals 15. I can solve 3x equals 12. Divide by 3, and x equals 4. Okay, 31. FIHG is a rhombus. FI is 11. What is the measure of the perimeter? And then what is the measure of IJH? Okay, so what is the properties that we know about a rhombus? Rhombus, that all sides are congruent. So if one of them is 11, all of them are 11. So then our perimeter would be 44 centimeters. Then the measure of IJH. Hey, we also know diagonals of a rhombus intersect how? In a rhombus, the diagonals intersect at 90-degree angles. They're perpendicular, so the measure of IJH is 90 degrees. Hey, 32. Examine the rectangle JKLM. We know that KN is 2x plus 5, and that NM is 6x plus 1. What do we know about diagonals in a rectangle? In a rectangle are congruent. They're equal to each other. And since they also bisect each other, each little segment, so KN has to be equal to NM. So 2x plus 5 equals 6x plus 1. So subtract 2x. We get 4x. Subtract 1. And you get 4. Divide by 4. And x equals 1. If I substitute that back in for any of those, 2 times 1 plus 5 is 7. So then we know that Kn is 7, and then Nm is 7. So Kn is 7. Km then is 14. And since diagonals are congruent, that tells us that Ln is 7 because JL is 14. Okay, Ln is half of JL. Since Km is congruent to JL, JL is 14. Half of that is 7. All right, 33. So if we want to find the sum of the interior angles, what do we use? There we go, n minus 2 times 180, not equals. So for A, number of sides of a hexagon is 6. So we go 6 minus 2 times 180. 6 minus 2 is 4. 4 times 180 is 720. For a decagon, we have 10 sides. So 10 minus 2 times 180. 10 minus 2 is 8. 8 times 180 is 1440. Now 34 is still talking about the sum of polygon interior angles. Difference between 34 and 33 is 34 gives us the angle measure. So we're still going to use n minus 2 times 180, but now this time it's going to be set equal to the angle. And then we have to solve. So we divide by 180. And n minus 2 equals 14. And then a lot of you forgot to do this on the quiz. We just divided by 180. You need to add 2 as well. So then n equals 16. Hey, so exterior angle theorem states that our exterior angle is equal to the sum of our two opposite interior angles, which allows us to set up the equation 3x plus 20 is equal to 57 plus 2x plus 3. So we get 3x plus 20 equals 2x plus 60. Subtract 2x. That gives us x. Subtract 20. And that gives us x equals 40. Now don't stop here because they didn't ask for x. They asked for a measure of DAB. So I need to substitute that back in. So 3 times 40 plus 20 is 120 plus 20, which is 140. 36. So we have triangle FGH. What type of triangle is that? It's an isosceles because we have two sides that are congruent, not a third side. So if we have two congruent sides in an isosceles triangle, we also have what? We have two congruent angles. So angle F is congruent to angle H. Now they tell us that GH is 5. So then FG has to be 5 as well. Those are the two congruent sides. If angle G is 44, we know all the angles have to add up to 180, and these are congruent. We can call both of these x. So we can go 44 plus x has to equal 180. Now, some of you I know just go 180 minus 44 and then divide by 2. I'm okay with that. You don't have to necessarily set up this equation, just showing you where that comes from. We get 44 plus 2x equals 180. Here's where you would subtract your 44, which a lot of you do without setting up this equation. You just subtract the known angle. That gives you 2x equals, what's that, 136. And then you know you need to cut in half because both angles are congruent, which is the same as in this equation divided by 2. So then x equals 78, which means the measure of angle F equals 78. So dividing by 2 there, that gives us 68. So thanks. All right, now looking at 37, we're going to do a triangle inequality theorem that states if I add up my two smallest sides, they have to be greater than my third side. So is 3 plus 6 greater than 10? No, so this one is not a triangle.
Wait.
Hey, for B, 30 plus 45, is that greater than 75? No, it's equal, but we have to be greater. So that doesn't work, so that's a no. Last one. 102 plus 203, is that greater than 304?
Yes.
Yes. So that is the only one of the three that actually is a triangle. The other ones are not.
Wait, I thought they all.
It is using the same idea to find your range. We know to get the low end, we're going to subtract our two values. So 23 minus 11 is 12. To get our high end, we're going to add our two values. And that gives us 34. All right, 39. Given an isosceles triangle, and we go R, S, T, where R, S, and RT are congruent. RS is 20 and R is 40. So similar one that we did already. If RS is 20, what is RT? Has to be 20 as well. And then if R is 40, we know the other two angles are congruent to each other. And all three of them have to add to 180. So if it's 40 already taken,
40 plus x plus x.
we subtract that and we get 140, or you can go 40 plus x plus x. Either way works. When you solve for the equation or the 140 here, we have to split it up. So we divide by 2, and that gives us 70 for both of our angles. List the angles in order from least to greatest. Remember, the smallest angle is across from the
Biggest.
smallest angle is across from the smallest side. So the smallest side here is 5. So the angle across from 5 is J. So we have angle J. Next in line is 9. The angle opposite 9 is angle I. And that leaves us with angle K as our last one. 12 is our largest side, and that is opposite of K. 41 now is just going the reverse order. We're given the angles and we want to find the sides. So the smallest side is opposite the smallest angle. So smallest angle is 43. The opposite side is LN. The next smallest angle is 57. That is opposite of MN. And then our last one is LM, which is across from 80. All right, 42. So listing out properties. So for a parallelogram, we know that opposite sides are congruent. So we have A. Congruent diagonals is not true, but we know opposite angles are congruent. So we have A and C. For a rectangle, opposite sides are congruent. We have congruent diagonals this time. And then opposite angles are congruent. And actually all angles are congruent in a rectangle because they're all 90. That's just not one of our options. So for a rectangle, it's A, B, and C. For a rhombus, opposite sides are congruent. Opposite angles are congruent. Our diagonals are perpendicular. And then actually even more accurate than opposite sides are congruent. In a rhombus, actually all sides are congruent. And last, a square. Opposite sides are congruent. But just like a rhombus, all sides are also congruent. We have congruent diagonals in a square, so we have that same property as a rectangle. Opposite angles are congruent, and actually all angles are congruent because they're all 90 degrees, just like a rectangle. And then we also have perpendicular diagonals. So notice a square has all the properties of all the ones before it. All right, 43. So we know that Km is 3x plus 25. And that JL is 8x minus 50. And then KNL, so that angle there, is 4y minus 10. Now, we want to figure out what values of x and y would make each of these figures. So for a rhombus, we know a couple things in a rhombus. We know all sides are congruent. Well, this is not asking about sides, it's asking about diagonals. Well, as we saw above, rhombus, the diagonals are not congruent, so we don't have to use our diagonals. What we do use is our angle, though. And so for a rhombus, we know that the interior angle there of our diagonals is perpendicular, so that has to be equal to 90. So we add 10, divide by 4, and y equals 25. So for a rhombus, y would have to equal 25. We also know that a square has the same property as a rhombus. So our diagonal angles would be 90, so that means a square, our y would have to equal 25. Now in a rectangle, the diagonals aren't 90, so there is no value for y that we can make it to be a rectangle, so we don't have to worry about that one. Now for a square, we know that diagonals are congruent, so we can state that 3x plus 25 is equal to 8x minus 50. Subtract 3x, that gives us 5x. Add 50, that gives us 75. Divide by 5, and x equals 15. So for a square, our diagonals would be congruent, which means our x has to be 15. We also know that a rectangle, the diagonals are congruent as well. So for a rectangle, x would be 15 as well.